Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Rotary Adelaide for having me today. Special thanks to Stephen Haynes for their invitation, President Gildy Cardi, who I had the pleasure of sitting next to and meeting today as well. And I'd also like to acknowledge Adelaide City Councillor Alfredo, who's joined us today, and potentially soon to be Councillor Jasmine, if you're going to run at the November elections. I'd also like to pay my respects and acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people. I do have a speech here. I will aim to follow it. I don't anticipate talking too long. I'm keen to take any questions that you all may have, but I will try and stick to the script. I think valuable conversations are a good starting point for community action, and it's great to be amongst a bunch of civic leaders, to be here talking about what is, well, on the back of the last week's federal budget, you could quite confidently say the single greatest policy challenge this country has faced in a generation. Housing is not available to many people. Only not that long ago, pre-COVID, when Bill Shorten ran against Scott Morrison, some of the policy changes we're seeing today, only 7 or so years later, were unfathomable. It lost the Bill Shorten and the Labor Party that election. The tide has shifted, and it's shifted quickly. It's the first time in a very long time that there's a younger cohort of eligible voters who, outnumber older voters. Many consider them boomers, if I can use that term. The boomers are now outnumbered, and as we've seen over the course of our lives, you've all seen over the course of your lives, politicians, governments are inclined to set policy for the greatest voting bloc. Why? Because they want to stay in power, they want to cling on to power, they're going to do whatever it takes for that result to be achieved, and oftentimes that is, leading into where the votes lie. And at the moment, and for the future, for the next generation, the votes lie with a younger cohort of people. If I distill that down to South Australia, it's fair to say, the state is on the cusp of something pretty special. I think we can all feel that. I think that doesn't come without challenges. There's inflation challenges, interest rates, cost of living, things we hear about ad nauseum. But if you compare South Australia to the rest of the country, we are in a pretty bloody good place. We're in a very good spot at the moment, but in order for us to achieve our potential, we really need to grasp the opportunities that lie in front of us. I'm not going to speak partisanly or anything like that. The Property Council is a non-partisan organisation. We work with all sides of politics. Of course, you've got your two major parties, but we work with all the minor parties as well. But to give some credit to the current government, it's fair to say that they've really put South Australia on the map, not just nationally, but internationally. Major events play a huge part in that. I know people have different views about major events or what's going on across the road with the trees coming down and what have you, but what it does do is it's a significant marketing tool, and that makes a big difference. It leads to a sense of identity. There's a concentration on the state, on the city. That leads to capital attraction. We need capital attraction. We need investment if we want to grow the economy, if we want to diversify the economy, because whether we like it or not, at the end of the day, government can't pay for everything. And when they try to do so, it can cause a lot of pain economically. And you need capital attraction if you want better healthcare. Well, the private sector needs to play its part in that. You want more housing? Private sector needs to play its part in that. You look at the debt loads of state governments, bar WA, who live in their own little world, and national, the federal government, the debt loads are high. The debt loads are high, and when your debt's high and you're not the US and in control of geopolitical events, you can be susceptible to economic shocks. And we got a taste of that when fuel prices rose exponentially earlier this year. So the private sector needs to play its part. It needs to invest capital, and having the focus of interstate competitors and international capital markets on South Australia is a positive thing. That boils down to us having those major events here. It plays a huge part. But growth comes with pressure. When I first came to Adelaide, I played soccer and I wasn't interested in this space, but it was fair to say, as someone who grew up in Sydney, there wasn't much happening in Adelaide in the early 2000s. I came to a place where, I was a teenager, I was 19, so you're out and about, you're trying to make friends that aren't in sport, so you can build a bit of a network where people aren't just badgering you about what you should have done on the field. And it became really apparent to me really quickly that everyone wanted to move to Melbourne. It was the weirdest thing for me. Everyone I spoke to, I need to go shopping in Melbourne, I need to move to Melbourne for a job. Melbourne, 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 Melbourne. And in Sydney, we never spoke about Melbourne. We didn't speak about anywhere else but Sydney. I can see how that's a flaw now as an adopted Adelaidean. But, it was really surprising. Holden's, what are we going to do with car manufacturing? Olympic Dam was going to be the next big thing that never eventuated. There were a lot of opportunities that Adelaide sort of saw, and it just passed the state by, right? It just passed South Australia by. And there was a real sense of, the place isn't going very far, it's not going very fast. Fast forward 20 years to where we are today, completely different discussion. We're talking about growing pains. We're not talking about decreasing population. We're not talking about brain drain. We're not talking about where's the next job coming from. We're talking about how do we house all the people that we're going to need to deliver on some of these big policy ideas. And a lot of them are in train and they're not for turning. AUKUS is not for turning. The infrastructure, at a bare minimum, even if we don't even put a submarine in the water, at a bare minimum that infrastructure is being built, and that is infrastructure that this state has never built before in its history. But it's not happening in and of itself. It's not happening in a silo. We got the biggest infrastructure project the state's ever embarked on in the Torrens to Darlington project. That's going to need thousands of people when it's at full tilt. Add to that the Women's and Children's just up the road here. Add to that Northern Water, if that's a lever the government pulls. We're going to need a hell of a lot more people. And that's not easy. That's not easy. That means things need to change and things need to shift. And I want to talk about some of the challenges, some of the practical solutions. We held a National Housing Summit last month in Melbourne. We'll talk about some of the key takeaways from that event. And finally, I guess I can't get through this speech without touching on our thoughts on the federal budget that was handed down last week, which is obviously a lot broader than housing. With a growing population, we need more housing. We don't, and you overlay that with an overwhelming sense of migration being an issue, right? And I was at an event in this room actually yesterday where the Premier spoke. And he said, and it's not a secret anymore because he told everyone in the room yesterday, but he said, One Nation did cause a wave and they'll continue to cause waves. So they did some polling. They did some polling after the election. Labor voters who went and voted One Nation. Why did they do that? And they drilled down a little bit and it all came down to migration. I got too much traffic on my street where I didn't have traffic before. Migrants. Too many migrants have come. My grocery bill's higher. It's migrants' fault. Can't get a rental, can't get a house, and that's where it becomes really emotive. They worry about their kids. They worry about themselves if they're renting especially, and they're blaming migrants. I think we're lucky to be in a state where we have a government whose disposition is to welcoming migrants, and the big part of that is because migration hasn't caused the housing crisis. During COVID, no one came. What happened to house prices? Went through the roof. They're not the reason that prices go up. It's a supply problem. And the Property Council, we speak about this ad nauseum. We have a supply problem because there are so many hurdles to getting a development off the ground, coupled with an economy that's running beyond its capacity. So not only do we have a feasibility problem, the cost of everything, land, labour, materials, interest rates, and what a consumer is now capable of paying. It's a real sort of, they call it the perfect storm, but essentially it is that. Because you cannot deliver a product if it doesn't bring you a return. And when your base cost for an apartment, for example, is $800,000, there's not that many people who can afford that cost for an apartment. Not house and land, not backyard for the kids to kick a footy around. That's just for an apartment. So what's the government do? Releases land. Concordia, Selix Beach, Dry Creek, Onkaparinga Heights. I reckon the Premier made that announcement 4 years ago. There's not even shovels in the ground, guys. It takes so long for these projects to get off the ground, and that's largely because all the planning required, all the infrastructure required has caused South Australia a massive challenge. And that's twofold. One, because the state didn't do much growth for about 30 odd years. Governments weren't compelled to spend what was required for growth. They could maintain and grow incrementally. Bit of money here, bit of money there, pull dividends out of SA Water, for example. And now we're on this exponential growth curve. There's a lot of catch-up required. We had a meeting with SA Water maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And, everyone expects that they're going to build something and they just plug into the system, right? There's pipes under the ground, there's water, there's wastewater. Well, the state's now at a point where that's all running at capacity. There's a project in the city that just started, 200-300 odd apartments. It's apartments and hotel. And they just got told that there's no capacity in that street, in the city, in the CBD. No capacity. So that project, without a solution in the next couple of weeks, will stop because their civil team needs to know how deep they need to trench for the sewer connection. And SA Water can't give them that information because the whole system's at capacity. And that's before you talk about laying pipes out into the outer suburbs. So we have a infill problem, we have a greenfield problem, and that adds time, and we all know time costs money, and that is the single greatest challenge this state faces, but the country faces it in globo in terms of the time it takes for a project to get out of the ground. Your feasibility study is blown to smithereens because building costs have gone up 10% a year, maybe a little bit more now with when you add fuel into that equation. So the concept of affordable housing is really one that governments in the next year or two, I think, are going to have to drop because it doesn't exist. Because the cost of delivery is not affordable. Add a small margin onto that, the cost to buy it is not going to be affordable for people. And we've been talking to Homestart and to the Treasurer about making Homestart go from you're just above the social housing type. So you're not in public housing, you're working, you're a nurse, your partner's a teacher maybe, you're stuck on this rental roundabout where you're paying $700 a week, And at the end of the month, you've got nothing really left. You've got 2 kids, they're going to school, it's sport, etc., etc. Homestart needs to broaden itself to be available to those type of key workers as well, because that's a real challenge. It needs to shift from being just for those who just keep their head above the parapet to actually key workers. You might have a household income of $150,000 to $200,000, but that won't get them into the housing market, not nearby where their work is. So if you're a primary school teacher in the inner to middle ring suburbs of Adelaide, probably afford to rent, live paycheck to paycheck, but you won't be able to buy in those suburbs anymore. They're no longer affordable. House and land packages at Riverlea are $1 million. Are $1 million, guys. And you know, when someone told me, I didn't believe them. So I went on realestate.com.au and Home Seeker, and yes, there is a 15% affordable, but all that does is make everything else more expensive. So when developers adhere to the 15% affordability, you know, they do a development, they commit to 15% of it being under the affordable housing price threshold, they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's cheaper, but everything else becomes more expensive, because at the end of the day, we just need the project to stack up, and that's a real challenge. Planning has been a major issue, and people talk about planning, and the federal government have come out with a few initiatives, but it comes with caveats that there'll be changes to planning in the requisite state for them to get some of the funding that's on offer. And that's because planning has become so unnecessarily complex. Planning, for those who may not know, is about land use. This land is proposed to be used for industrial, is proposed to be used for residential, whatever the purpose might be. Is that land use adequate for what the proponent is asking to develop on that site? Yes or no? That's what planning should be. That's essentially what it is. But it's morphed into this mega industry that talks about structure plans, stormwater plans, engineering. You don't even know what your land use is yet. So a developer wants to do a development, apartment, townhouses, doesn't matter. And you often have councils go back to them, asking them for things, their planning departments, asking them for things that actually councils aren't allowed to ask for. But they do ask. And they'll say, we need your full stormwater engineering. You don't even know what you're allowed to build yet. It hasn't even passed the council assessment panel. So there's some challenges around planning, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. Are you trying to wrap me up, Stephen? Is that why you stand there? We going to questions? No, I'm getting to the solutions. There are some solutions. I'll stick to my script now. First priority in accelerating housing supply is planning reformed and streamlined approvals. Every delay adds cost, and every layer of assessment reduces feasibility. In an environment of high interest rates and construction costs, lengthy approval timeframes are killing projects. One of the key takeaways of our Housing Solutions Summit was around having a culture of yes. A culture of yes, not a culture of no, especially across our planning systems. That doesn't mean we're saying yes to poor outcomes. It means that we recognise that if a project aligns with strategic policy settings and it complies with planning rules and delivers community benefit, the system should facilitate that delivery. The other key certainty, industry can work with both taxes and regulations. That's fine, we understand that. But what becomes difficult is the inconsistency, unpredictability, and fragmented across a number of systems, 68 councils in South Australia, for example. Some other key takeaways is investment for enabling infrastructure. One of the good things that came out of the federal budget was a $2 billion commitment for enabling infrastructure. Now, that won't be enough, but it is something, because that is one of the key bottlenecks to delivering more housing supply. We also need to support higher density and greater housing diversity in appropriate locations. This is particularly important around transport corridors and employment precincts. People need to be able to live close to where they work. The Property Council has maintained a focus on supporting more medium density housing, more apartments, and more diverse housing typologies. We're seeing more retirement living, residential aged care, build to rent and purpose-built student accommodation coming online to support more housing for South Australians. On the federal budget, the Property Council's national analysis of the federal budget acknowledged several positive measures focused on housing supply and infrastructure. The federal government has now committed billions towards that enabling infrastructure, but a lot more will be needed. The budget also proposed some significant tax changes relating to property investment. While the government stepped back from applying certain tax increases to investment in new builds, so we're happy they've exempted those, there are some questions around how broader tax changes may impact investor confidence and decision making. I would warn that investor behaviour matters enormously because private capital funds the overwhelming majority of new housing delivery in Australia. Policy settings must encourage investment, else fewer projects will proceed, and fewer projects mean fewer houses. With lower taxes, less regulation, faster planning systems, stronger investment in enabling infrastructure, we do have an opportunity to address this housing crisis. South Australia has a major opportunity ahead of it. There's a positive. We're a growing state with enormous potential, and people generally want to come here. But housing supply is central to productivity, competitiveness, and livability. We know what the problems are, and we are learning what the solutions are too. Faster approvals, better infrastructure coordination, certainty, diversity of choice, planning culture, all supports positive outcomes. Government cannot solve this issue alone, and neither can industry. But our sector is prepared to do the heavy lifting to support more, better located housing developed faster. Thank you.
Okay, questions?
Oh, turn it on. Turn it on.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. Out of curiosity, when you said that they've promised that we're going to get a couple of $1 billion worth of infrastructure, but then you said that 4 years ago they promised us that they would get more housing and everything else out, but it takes so much time. How long do you actually anticipate that the $2 billion that they promised us in infrastructure will actually take effect?
So the $2 billion is a federal promise. So we'll get about 7-8% of that. In the housing roadmap, the Premier announced $1.5 billion of enabling infrastructure. That's been rolling out, but it's to specific sites. So you could imagine everyone's surprise a couple of weeks ago when SA Water said there was no capacity. Everyone turned around and said, what about the $1.5 billion? But all our wastewater, not all, but about 85% of it goes to Bolivar, and Bolivar's at capacity. So it doesn't matter what you're plugging into where, it's all leading down to the same place, and that place doesn't have any more capacity. So they're probably going to need to find another 1.5 or more billion in the next 4 years.
Thank you, that was good. A question about rentals. So in this country, we have a culture of 1 year rolling rental contracts. So it's not just rental affordability, it's security of housing. Any thoughts on that?
Look, it's fair to say in this country we have the wrong type of landlords. The Property Council has been pushing for build to rent, which, for those who don't know, sophisticated, generally multinational investors who own the asset can provide 5-year leases, 4-year leases. You know what your increase is going to be. You can paint the wall. You can hang pictures on the. It's your home largely, and you can move throughout the building as you have a family, etc. You might start in a 1-bedroom. You might move up to the 3-bedroom in time. The challenge in Australia is, when I say the wrong type of landlords, you've got largely, overwhelmingly, mum and dad investors who are no different to any of us, who feel the same economic challenges that the society does. So when council rates go up, when interest rates go up, what happens? They have to put the rent up, because whatever they're putting the rent up is less than all the cost escalations that they're also needing to absorb. And that causes a lot of problems. They either need to sell the house, tenant needs to go, they need to put rent up a lot, $100 a week, but the mortgage on that home might be up $1,000 a month. So it makes for a precarious environment, a rental environment. The federal government have made some changes to make build to rent more attractive for, say, international capital, superannuation funds, etc. But there's been not a great deal of take up of build to rent as yet as an asset class.
One more question.
Just wondering, are councils going to get a bit more lenient, allowing people to build granny flats in their backyard to help with this rental crisis for their kids and elderly parents?
Yeah, look, I don't know. We met with the minister a couple of weeks ago and actually proposed to him that council assessment panels are a huge problem. They're a huge weapon.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. Well, Bruce, I think we travel north frequently, and I don't know whether many of these members back, I think, the main number of and I just wonder, John, but that is like very well.